Hello, everybody. Um, so yes, I was actually pissed because I got interrupted. I didn't want this actually to be seen as a first video ever because it's so shocking the information that's about to be revealed. And I didn't want the focus of this series or even this Al Bielek complete autobiography, video autobiography, to be the upcoming content. Now, with that being said, the gods have spoken. My thing broke. And actually, I've recorded this even once. I recorded this again. So this is like the third take, which was frustrating. I left my thing on mute. And everything I was saying, you guys couldn't hear. I kind of like insert things every now and then. So let's hop into it without further ado. Al Bielek. Here we go.
In reference to the Montauk project, I want to show you at least one picture. There are many that have been taken of Montauk. All that I have, of course, have been taken after the project was down and collapsed. There's one particular one, though, that I think is perhaps the symbol of Montauk, and that's the radar tower. I'm going to put that up and show it.
I can barely see it.
This picture is significant because the radar tower was built in the late 40s.
You almost forgot.
Certainly the money was there in the family, and the prestige of the family was such that I was able to enter Princeton University. Brother Duncan, for whatever reason, decided to go to the...
Give me a second. Let me get it back. While I'm getting it back, credits go out to Channel 3X for this. I could barely see that. Maybe just go to the original, the complete autobiography at Channel 3X, and then you'll be able to see it, hopefully. Because I don't know the exact place I'm going to go up to when he's holding the picture.
This picture is significant because the radar tower was built in the late 40s, early 50s.
Nope.
This picture is significant. I'm going to put that up and show it.
Like I said, you can go to channel credits to channel. It looks like Twin Towers to me, so you go to Channel 3X.
This picture is significant because the radar tower was built in the late 40s, early 50s, as part of the early SAGE radar warning system, which was perfected engineering-wise at Montauk and then the beam used, but that was part of the SAGE system. And it's become, you might say, a symbol of Montauk. Some people say Montauk doesn't exist. They don't know what they're talking about because the whole physical structure is still there. The underground has been sealed off since.
Right.
What are we talking about when we say a Montauk boy? That is an appellation, a term we coined, meaning a young boy. I do not mean a young adult. It's actually around the age of puberty. Though, of course, this has been ongoing since '76, who has been run through the program to be literally programmed. The selection is, of course, around the age of puberty. And it's a nickname we've put on them because they've been programmed and went through Montauk. Today, it doesn't mean that they all went through Montauk because there are many other facilities which now are operational to produce the, quote, Montauk boy, unquote. Let us go back a little bit briefly in terms of history in this century. I'm not talking about ancient history, as to what mind control is about and who got involved with the project and what various little rivulets, if you will, all came together to produce the mainstream called Mind Control and the Montauk Boy. There were, of course, various psychologists and psychiatrists in the past that have been involved in the periphery of this. It came from Europe, basically, and one of the original people who got involved with this directly was Dr. Wilhelm Reich. He was a student of Sigmund Freud of Vienna, came to the United States in about 1943. I'm referring, of course, to Dr. Wilhelm Reich, He took up residence in Long Island. Then in 46, 47, he moved up to Rangeley, Maine, and put his main laboratory facility up there. In 1947, he was offered and accepted a contract with the CIA, newly formed, which basically was related to finding a function as to how can a person be deprogrammed. This was the way the contract read. How can the person be deprogrammed, and also can you increase the psychic abilities of young people who already exhibit such abilities? Reich signed the contract. It was a 5-year-long contract. And about halfway through it, he realized that this wasn't all that the CIA wanted, and they had misrepresented to him, because what they really wanted was a means for programming as well as deprogramming. One is the opposite side of the coin of the other. And yes, they definitely did want to find ways to make psychics more psychic. That perhaps was part of the same program. Actually, it became separate.
I always feel like I got to point this out. There's so many people who say, oh, it's too woo-woo. This is too woo-woo. But the government, as far back as 1976, was already far off that the psychic stuff is woo-woo. And, hey, how can we make psychics more psychic? So one thing I like to say is that super rich and the uber rich have their psychics and their astrologers. And, mid-level professionals, everything have accountants and professionals who help them earn more money. And then like the average person and lower class. So I don't know how classify these categories as far as income strata. Really, it's more of consciousness strata. The average person is like, oh, this is all woo woo. And so, or has nothing. My fault. It doesn't say it's all woo. It doesn't have anything. Just works. And there's nothing wrong with just working. Everyone's at different conscious levels, but part of life is stepping up your conscious level so you can have more enjoyment. But and know what's going on around you. But anyway, here we go. I'm gonna let Al Bielek get back into it. He said they're trying to do something that makes psychics more psychic. Okay. Mind control or programming. That's key. That's not. They want to figure out. They've hired Dr. Wilhelm Reich to. I should know that. I'm a therapist. To do programming, deprogramming. What they're really after is programming. Guys, it sucks because this is the third time I've watched this. So I'm actually saying that if you watch this for the first time, this whole interview should be watched twice to really gather things. Because I'm seeing things that I'm like, oh, did you see that last? Oh. And I'm like, oh, it's the first time watching. So here we go.
Reich went through about 2.5 years of this at Rangeley, and then he decided he wasn't going to give the CIA the notes which he was generating. So he falsified the records about the last 2.5 years, but this was not known to the CIA at that time. In 1952, he says, I'm not renewing the contract. I've done my work, and this is it, and I'm going to do other things on my own after that. Well, at that point, the CIA didn't know, and of course NSA was directly involved with this also, that perhaps the records had been falsified. To go ahead a bit in time, to the period sometime in the 60s, Preston Nichols, who was a surplus electronics dealer and was working for a corporation on the island and had a great deal of interest in Wilhelm Reich, and of course Reich being dead since 1957, they were slowly breaking up his estate and breaking up and selling various pieces of his estate, known as Orgone energy accumulators and a lot of other hardware. They showed up at various surplus places. Preston had an interest in it and used to go see what was available. Occasionally bought something. At one of these meets, after looking us over, he asked the person who was exhibiting and trying to sell the Reich equipment, is this all you have? He says, well, no. He says, really, you need to get in touch with one of the curators and the people who are holding the rest of Reich's estate. He said he has a home in another location in Vermont that very few people know about. It's not just Rangeley, Maine. He said he had another home. Call so-and-so and contact him, go up and see him. He may have something you may be more interested in. Preston did this, was invited up there and went up and looked around, saw much of the same thing, and then they asked, well, what else do you have? And this man says, well, I got some notebooks. These notebooks, I'd like to see them. So Preston looked at them, and they were all handwritten in Reich's handwriting. He recognized it from some other documents he'd seen and realized these might be very important notebooks. So we asked the man how much you want for them. He says, make an offer. Preston did. He bought them, took them home. About 2 months later, he gets a call from somebody in the NSA. It says, I understand, person on the other hand saying, I understand that you have bought some notebooks of Wilhelm Reich's. And he said, yes, I bought them. They're mine. Well, we need them. Well, they're legally mine. You can't have them. Well, NSA said, we need them. We have reason to believe that a good part of the material which was given to us by Reich is in error deliberately and has been falsified. You may have the originals which we need. So Preston made a deal with them, which basically said NSA would give Preston the missing notes that he didn't have if he, Preston, would give the NSA and CIA copies of what he had. And part of the agreement was that he would never show the complete notebooks to anyone as long as he lived, which he agreed to. So we wound up with the complete notes, and so did CIA and NSA, which is what they wanted. That, of course, went on to be used later on as part of the Montauk Boy program. What Reich had basically discovered, and this is an extremely important point, was that there is a point in which you can gain access to the subconscious mind. And as later research showed, there's more than one subconscious mind. There's about 12 levels. But you can access it with the conscious mind under one condition, and that is the point of orgasm. I won't go into any of the details, of course, of what Reich had to do up there to find this out. Well, there was years of experimentation. But at that point, the two minds join, and you can remove information from the subconscious through the conscious or put information in, and then you can give instruction to the subconscious. This memory will be held separate from the conscious mind and cannot be accessed without such and such code number or code words or however they wanted to work it.
So get this. And I'm sorry if this shocked you. Warning, a lot of trigger material ahead. So there's something that I like to say that I could say, well, maybe I'll make a TikTok where I say, hey, ladies, the next time they ask you, what do you bring to the table? Tell your man magic. I mean, let's see your funny say the magic of our love or whatever. So what am I saying? I'm saying Bielek says that this is crazy. It's shocking, especially for me as a mental health professional. There's 12 levels of the unconscious mind. It's almost like, sounds like we're almost in the what's that one? Inception movie. But there's 12 levels of the subconscious mind. And they said that Wilhelm Reich found that when you, it makes me think of the Jesus and the 12 disciples. Anyway, I'm not going to stay out of that. But that the conscious mind unites with the unconscious mind in all these 12 levels at the point of orgasm. Why did I say that about the females, sex magic? Because you're going to find this out a little bit later, is that the females' orgasm and that state lasts longer. Therefore, when a man and female are in love with each other, or you'll find out later here in a second, it could be a male and a male. But once that orgasmic state is reached, they're not going to say it's in here. That's what I'm talking. I'm just clarifying the sex magic line. Is that beings can make wishes together, manifest the whole reality. This is in Think and Grow Rich, how a man in love is able to make more money and do more stuff because he's in love. That has to do with that's even something else too. That love is a creative vortice that I'm doing the. I don't want to get too far into that. This is a separate thought, separate line of thinking. But so this is groundbreaking right here. This is crazy. Let's continue.
He found that was a key element. In other words, Mr. Sigmund Freud was not exactly wrong when he said sex is almost the most important thing in life. He became known, that is Freud, as something of a sex maniac. He wasn't. He was trying to point out that it plays a more important part in our life than most people realize. Not particularly or necessarily in part of the sex act, but because of the relationships through the conscious and subconscious minds. This became an important point, and of course there was other work being done in that same time period. I'm sure you've heard, or some people have heard of MK Ultra and that whole project involving LSD and other mind-bending chemicals. conducted initially by Dr. Ewing Cameron for the CIA, in which he conducted this program in Canada. The CIA felt it was too hot to handle in the U.S., so they sent him to Canada, and eventually the Canadian government and people found out about it, and he was almost thrown out of Canada. But he uncovered the fact that these mind-bending chemicals can be used as part of a programming technique. There are many ends, many loose pieces had to come together so that all of these rivulets provided a mainstream whereby there's a base of knowledge which could be used for programming someone. In the process, they also found, and this was somewhat later, that the human mind, and Tesla did a lot of the early research on this, I might add, that the human mind can be accessed by electronic means, RF carriers at the proper high frequencies, when they are essentially converted into a scalar waveform. Scalar, mathematically, is second order, electromagnetic propagation is first order. And if you do it in a scalar form, the human mind, the brain, is very receptive to scalar energies.
Wow. Shout out to the YouTube channel, Channeling Eric, spelled E-R-I-K, Channeling Eric, where Elisa met us, MD doctor, channels her son, Eric, who's crossed over to the other side and actually helps people. Eric showed up in like three or four of my psychic sessions with separate psychics. I have no relation to Elisa. She doesn't even know this. I've never told her. I watch her show and I often just like her stuff. Has a lot of great content there. She's done a lot of great work. And she's doing scalar waves. So shout out to Elisa. Elisa, sorry if I said your name wrong. I love your work. Yeah, I don't know exactly what she does with scalar waves. I'm not a customer yet. I'm going to maybe down the road. But he's talking here. Now we know scalar waves are significant, is what I'm saying. You know, I leave it to the smart people. She's a doctor, and these guys smart. Hey.
In fact, it can act like a direction finder to locate the source of the energy. But it will pick this information up if it's transmitted in scalar form as a direct input to the mind, as if you heard it spoken. Now, this became very important as part of the project for the Montauk Boys in the final stages of programming. All of these ideas came together, and they tried in the earliest phases, around 1975-76, to program these boys in a very physical way. Now, I don't want to go into gross details, but basically you had to make a physical connection between two males. The programmer was a male, and the typical and primary programmer in the early days was my brother Duncan. He got hold into this project, as did Preston Nichols. Preston Nichols set up the programming, and he will admit it today openly, so I'm not afraid to say it. But he set up the programming for the Montauk Boys program and the techniques involved in programming. And Preston had to use Duncan and some others in the earlier phases of the programming. Now, there are some peculiarities of the human nervous system. I don't know how many people have seen Grey's Anatomy or books like that and show the whole setup of the...
You know, I'm shaking my head because he's a star. Those like Channel 3X is based on the life of Al Bielek, Stuart Swedlow, Preston Nichols, I think somewhere else. So there's probably a lot of content I need to go tap over there to go watch. Hope I don't get this YouTube station taken down before. Anyway, let's go.
Nervous system, which does not show and include, of course, the setup of the chakras in the human body, the energy chakras, which are semi-physical.
Spiritual people, listen to this.
There are 8 chakras. Yogis teach 7. They're in error. There's 8. The 8th one is the crown chakra over the head. But they are in opposing pairs, a polarity. Number 1 chakra, the base, if you say and call it arbitrarily positive. The second one is negative, positive, negative, and so forth, until you get to the top of the 8th chakra, which will be, quote, negative, whatever that means. I'm just doing this for the purpose of showing there's an opposition of polarity. Because the first chakra in the male is a sex chakra, it becomes easily manipulable. In the female, the whole polarity is reversed. Females could not be used in the techniques used for the Montauk Boys, not until very much later. The programming being quite physical, and they pick these victims, and I do have to use the word victims, around the age of puberty, because at that point, the male or boy, well, for that matter, females, but particularly males, are most amenable to mind manipulation. After the age of about 17, people start, particularly males, to get a mindset, and it becomes much more difficult to modify their mind and put in this mindset that they want, rather than one which develops naturally, and bury all kinds of things in the subconscious. So typically, they're all chosen around puberty, which can be anywhere from the age 11 to 16, depending on when the person becomes sexually active. Puberty in the South is much earlier than in the North, and of course, there are all kinds of personal variations. And a candidate who is sought out, of course, this is one of the things they have to look at. They have to make sure that he's gone through the puberty period, pubescence has already occurred. They select also on the basis of IQ, at least 100. They wanted somebody who's at least normal IQ. If they're up in the 200 region, that's fine. They're useful for other projects, other than the normal ones. And they all had to go basically through the same process, but they also looked at them in terms of genetics. When the program originally started at Montauk, they were all Caucasians, white-skinned, fair-haired, typically blonde-haired, blue-eyed. And in the process of recovering my memories, after this was all over in 83, phase one, of course, in 83, and I started reviewing this and coming up with the information, I said, well, this, to me, smacks like one of the old Nazi projects, the super race projects. And in some respects, that was true. The candidates were chosen on that basis originally, at least at Montauk. As I found out some years later, there was a parallel project being run by the NSA directly in their own way in a nursing home in Jamaica, Long Island, between 1976 and 1979, where for some reason it was terminated. The man who ran this was an NSA man, and many years again, after this program was over, I happened to run into him in one of my lecture series in the South in North Carolina at a dinner party thrown by the people who had sponsored me for a lecture. And this man was a drinker. Eventually, he got drunk enough that night. He says, Al, there's some things I got to tell you. And he told me about his involvement with the mind control programs, the Montauk Boys via NSA at this facility in Jamaica. So I asked him some of the same questions I asked those who were over me at that time. Did they ever tell you what they were going to use these kids for? And he says, no, they would never give me any indication. Did they ever tell you when they were going to use them? And I said, yes, more or less. And we agreed that the, at that time, stated goal in terms of dates was around 1995, 97, where there would be the primary use of these boys. But he said, that I couldn't get any information out of them. And that program was forwarded. But I said, well, were they all Caucasian? He says, no, there were very few Caucasians in that project. And I said, what were there in there? He says, we had Jewish kids, we had Orientals, we had all kinds of others, very few whites. Apparently, it was a program used to find out whether or not you could program other than Caucasian for the same end, which did prove to be true. So that the race was not important. This was apparently a chosen factor by those who ran the program at Montauk. Not essential that they be white. That was a very interesting side piece of information. So this program, as originally set up with very physical programming, caused a lot of problems. One of the other problems that occurred, which was very obvious in a matter of a few years, was that approximately 70% of the boys programmed there in the Montauk Boys program were programmed as homosexuals. It was very easy to shift the sexual orientation under those type of programming conditions. Why they wanted 70% or so of homosexuals, I don't know. It backfired on them for the simple reason that homosexuals get together. They create enough Kundalini energy, usually, that it breaks the program. So they were deprogramming themselves, and that's not what the government wanted, or those who ran the program. When I say government, understand that we all assumed that
this is huge. This is huge. This is about to start cooking here. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna be able to stop it this much. But basically, they said when homosexuals get together, I don't know if it's one-on-one homosexual, but maybe in groups, they said it breaks the programming because the Kundalini energy raises up. The Kundalini is what the medical symbol based off of, the caduceus. I'm sure you know what the Kundalini energy is, but the Kundalini energy rising up the spine breaks the programming. So for anybody who wants to deprogram themselves, if you can raise your Kundalini up, but it's supposed to, we learn in Law of One, the safest way to raise the Kundalini up is through the disciplines of the personality, learning to choose love, learning to speak your truth, things of that sort. So also shout out to a book here, Making Love to God by Tina Louise Spalding. It's a great book for your love life. They talk about, in that book, it's talked about ways to raise your Kundalini energy with your loved one, with your partner together. A lot of people, I said that at a big group one time, and the guy, 5 years ago actually, the head person who had like 20,000 followers, because in the group I only had 1,000, he had like 20,000. Just listen to him, he's like, that's not possible. But it is. It's possible through tantric yoga, tantric sexual exchange of that. Anyway, Making Love to God by Tina Louise Spalding, great book. Happy Love Life. But he says here that breaks the programming. And then he's about to keep on going. I may even rewind it because we said it we was about to say here's important again.
So homosexuals, I don't know. It backfired on them for the simple reason that homosexuals get together. They create enough Kundalini energy, usually, that it breaks the program. So they were deprogramming themselves, and that's not what the government wanted, or those who ran the program. When I say government, understand that we all assumed at this point in time that this program was government-sponsored and government-run. We eventually found out it was not. Government used various elements of the government, and departments of the government used the program in terms of the output. They did not run it. They had overseas and overseers of it, and of course the intelligence community was in on it. Along about 78, 79, various electronic techniques were developed which would do the same thing. So they dropped out this whole physical business because it had a very low output. Many of them had to be beaten into submission because they didn't want to go through with the program, and they quite literally beaten someone to death. And let's say the yield was not what they wanted. So along came the...
Mark that, around 78 or 79, they stopped using physical techniques, which means sexual, and started using electronic
techniques, using essentially EEG type equipment, or in reading the brain waves. Of course, you put pads on the head in various locations to pick up those sensitive energies, very low level energies, but easily picked up by the amplifiers and the pads. And this was turned around so that it became a machine like an EEG machine, but the pads were put on sensitive points of the body, including the genitalia, and energies were put in instead of taking energy out. The purpose being the use of this special programs developed and put on floppy disks, usually took 2. They would create the orgastic state by means of this machine. They could hold it as long as they wanted. And with that, of course, they could then program either verbally or by means of Pat Flanagan's machine, which I showed in a recent lecture. His patent goes back quite a distance to about 1968. The government seized it because there was a means whereby somebody could talk into a microphone through an amplifier with oscillators and certain other equipment, fairly simple. Put 2 pads on the body in any location, essentially. Now, you put it on the wrist, or you could put it on the chest or the back, and the person would hear the sound spoken into the microphone, even though he was not getting it through his ears. It was going through the nervous system and winding up in the auditory centers. Flanagan got patents on this. It was one of the first patents of its type. And it didn't take long for the government to recognize the potentialities, and they seized it under the interests of national security, and it took them an 11-year court fight to get it back. They gave it back and let it be released into the normal stream when they found something better, is what it really comes down to. But by means of a machine like Flanagan's or verbal instruction directly, these kids were programmed as to whatever they wanted while in this state. Then, of course, code words were put in, or numbers, or whatever the keying technique was they wanted. And it's all closed off. They were told they wouldn't remember anything, which, likened them to hypnosis, you don't, because the state was similar to hypnosis, but it was not identical. And they would be released and sent back to wherever they came from. All right, what kind of boys did they use? Where did they come from? And what was the implications of all of this in terms of, let's say, the reservoir of personnel required? Initially, the boys were taken almost off the streets of Long Island. Some of them came from rather prominent families. And quite literally were picked up physically, taken to the station, processed, and brought back. But I pointed out to them before I even became involved with the program. Early on, they wanted me in, and I refused to become part of it after witnessing one of the failed programming attempts. They picked them up off the street, and I told them, I said, you better be careful about this. Some of these kids come from prominent families on Long Island who have a lot of clout, and it wouldn't be doing the program any good for it to turn up in the Long Island Press or the New York Times. So they started picking them up at greater distances and finally focused in on homeless kids, street kids, if you will, who had no home, broken from their homes for whatever reason, broken all association, and many of them were down and penniless, broke, didn't even know where the next meal was going to come from. A serious problem in New York and a lot of other cities. So they started picking these kids up because they were quite literally homeless when they were done programming them.
Now pay attention. Remember, these people, if you're just checking in, at this point, they have control over all time and space using these things called Montauk tunnels. I think he's about to talk about it again. So that's why I didn't want to just feature this interview. You really need to watch the whole 5-hour interview, 5.5-hour interview. I would recommend watching the whole thing, even at Channel 3X. I'm not trying to compete with them when I come out with this. But basically, yeah, they have control of all time and space. And when he says picking them up, they're not throwing them in a car. No, they're using I think he's about to explain it again, tunnels. You have to look at the previous episodes of this or go back. But pretty much they're tunnels that could take you there instantaneously. So they could travel, they could take you from anywhere in the world instantaneously. He's going to talk about that thing more.
They would send them back to where they had come from, waiting to be used. By 1979, with the electronic system fully operational, I went to Jack Pruitt, the station master, and said, look, we've got to change this program. You're beating half these kids to death. They're being treated very badly. They refuse to become part of it. Let's change this whole thing around. First of all, it can be done electronically now, so that cleans up that part of it. And secondly, instead of beating them into submission, offer them a carrot. Give them something. And he says, sounds good, but that's out of my reach. It's definitely out of my jurisdiction. You'll have to go higher up. I went up the line to the technical director, Dr. Herman C. Unterman, and others. Finally wound up someplace near the top for the man who I recognize today, but he is still alive, so I won't use his name, and told him what I proposed. And he says, I haven't got time for this. I don't want to hear about it. I says, well, maybe the Long Island Press, the New York Times would like to hear about it. Well, he froze at that point. He says, wait in my outer office. I got to make some phone calls. So I waited about half an hour. 40 minutes later, he pulls me back in. He says, you can guarantee this program will work the way you outlined? I said, yes. He says, go ahead and do it. I says, I want it in writing that you have given me permission to do this. And she wrote up a letter and signed it. So I went back and we threw out the man who was doing the beatings and offered essentially this kind of program. They picked the guys up. They run through a pre-screening process. And then we'd say to them, we know most of you are homeless and have no money and can't even go back to school. If you will join this program voluntarily and become part of it, after it's over, you will not remember that you have been here and been part of it. But we will do this for you. We will give you a bank account. We will give you money to live on. It will be expected you will go back to school and finish your schooling, because most of them hadn't finished high school, and some of them weren't even quite up to high school. Go back and finish your schooling, and said if you want to go on to college, go right ahead, the money will be there. And if you want to go get a PhD and think you can do it, fine. But when you have finished your education, whatever level you decide to go to, when you get into the mainstream of society and working, we will no longer feed your bank account. And you will, of course, not remember any part of this until such time as we decide we need to use you for whatever purpose it may be. Nothing was explained of what the purposes were at this point. It was about 90% acceptance, which was a lot better than something like 40%. And they went along with it voluntarily. I told them, I said, if you don't want to be part of the program, you're free to leave. Of course, you will never remember having been here. A few left, most stayed. So the program output went up and the numbers went up. At one point, that is in my early recovery of the Montauk memories, which was 1986, I put 2 to 2 together and came up with a number about, well, maybe we processed about 10,000 Montauk boys. That proved to be a gross underestimate, as I found out much later. But one of the questions will be, and is, of course, how did they continue to pull these people in? And in view of the fact that later the numbers went into the millions, how did they get these recruits? Where did they get them from? They took them from all over the U.S. Well, did they pick them up with a car and drive them there, or put them on a plane, or just capture them physically? What did they do? No, they didn't. Eventually, it came down very simply to using the Montauk Tunnel. They would go into an area, scan it. Perhaps agents would go into an area and scan it to see if there were appropriate material there for the Montauk Boys program. They would pick them up by means of the time tunnel, instantaneously transport them to Montauk, pre-screen them, see if they were part of the program, process them, and ship them back to where they'd come from. And with the capability of not only transportation physically in space, but also time manipulation, they could pick them up, let's say, at 12:01 a.m. some other morning or some day that they wanted to pick these people up. I might run them through Montauk and take a week at it, ship them back at 12:01 plus half a second. They would never remember it ever happened. There would be no indications they had ever been anywhere. Nobody who their friends would ever see that they had been missing. And they did this on a very regular basis for a long period of time.
I get that. And that, of course, you have a chance to rewind if you're watching this later. But I'm still going to say it. He just said pretty much, when he said physical, he meant using the teleport channel. So you could be walking. I don't know what that is. Gotta watch out. They may come for me. You know what I'm saying? Hey. So you could be walking. You could be walking. And so a kid could be walking home from school. And you trigger, like I said, trigger warning for any parents watching as well. Your child could be sleeping there in bed. You can be carefully watching over them. Turn away. They could take the child for a week, do this program, and return them within half a second. And even worse, this technology. He's talking about this. This is the 1980s. They had this, and he says this isn't necessarily the government. And we're going to learn at some point, if you go study Law of One, potentially who's doing it. He says they're off-planetary. Well, he says he's going to get to that here in a second. I don't think he ever figured that out in his lifetime. That's why, as you can see, I'm looking around. Hey, guys, just in case you're lazy, you're not going to read Law of One. Guys, a lot of this stuff you see is so sensitive. I'm going to have a top performers program where I teach privately, but like I can't really teach publicly like that. I've just concluded. So I can't. I'm not free to speak the way I want to. I guess I don't know. I don't feel. It could be too damn. Anyway, it could really hurt someone's mind. And I don't know if the masses are really ready for this, to be honest. So, but what they do say in Law of One is certain types of this programming can be discovered and potentially removed with hypnosis. So if you want to go get hypnosis session and see if this has been done to you, I recommend going to QHHT. Look at that. They don't program me, remove the thought from my mind. I'm just playing. Anyway, go to QHHTofficial.com. And you can find a professional there in your local area who could do a certain type of hypnosis, which is quantum healing. You can read about it on the website, quantum healing hypnosis. Also, I recommend watching YouTube videos. Now, she's not doing QHHT. She's very, I don't like to knock that, but she's very advanced, I guess. She's doing a spiritual forgiveness practice. Her name is Alba Weinman, ALBA, and then Weinman. Her YouTube channel is right here on YouTube, WEIALBA, then WEINMAN. Go watch her channel. Oh my gosh, one of my favorite YouTube channels, right up there, Channeling Eric. You know, I hate to choose which one's a favorite, live like this, but I love those stations. Alba, thank you for the time you put me in that group hypnosis. It really helped me, actually. I didn't think it was significant at the time. Sometimes that's how these things work. I joined a group teleworkshop with Alba Weinman, and I got put in hypnosis. And what I saw is still helping me till today. So thank you, Alba. Love you. And love you too, Lisa. And yeah, guys, these are light workers. They're working hard. Their stations deserve to have millions. It's sad that so few people are paying attention. The year right now, just in case in the future, just turned 2025. Yeah, it's huge. 2025 just turned 2025. But so you can get hypnosis done on you. And now, like I said, Alba's not doing QHHT. She's doing her own method. Here we go. Let me Bielek get back into it. Here we go.
The program was removed from Montauk itself in about 1980. I was involved in it from 1979 until about 81 because not all phases were removed from Montauk. And it spread from there to 6 locations on Long Island, and every major city in the U.S. had a Montauk Boys program sometime after 83. The Montauk project collapsed on the night of 12 August 83, as previously outlined, due to the arrival of Duncan and myself in our original form from the Eldridge. And when we were left, of course, then Duncan number 2, the reborn Duncan, was triggered in order to set loose this monster to shut down the station. The station was shut down on the night of 12 August 1983, at least on the surface. I understand from one of the people who remained on there for over a year after that some operations below decks, so to speak, continued. But then it was closed completely, rebuilt, another 2 levels added underground from what we were told, and reopened in 1987. The Montauk project continued for the same basic personnel from 1987 to 1991, doing mind control, other types of things like traveling across the galaxy with the time tunnels, doing whatever they wanted to do. And in 1991, the Air Force moved in and took over because they had a very special project in mind. I was not part of this. Only know about it through Preston Nichols, who was part of it. He was pulled back in. Operation Sky Pebbles. While this is not part of my history, it is interesting to note that Operation Sky Pebbles was the Air Force's official title in the program to divert the comet known as Hale-Bopp, which arrived in 1997-98. They knew about Hale-Bopp 10 years before it arrived in orbit inside the solar system, and of course swept around past the Earth. The reason it swept around past the Earth is because Montauk Point, using extremely powerful particle beam weapon systems, was part of the later research. And that, of course, goes back to some of Tesla's original work. We used to divert it. Now, the 2 people, of course, who were given credit for it, Drs.
So get this. He just said that
Hale and Dr. Bopp.
He just said that this comet, I forgot the name of it, they discovered they had to take over the Montauk, which is weird because he said that it wasn't the government they're working for, and the Air Force took it over. So which one is it? You know what I'm saying? But he says the Air Force took it over in 1991. They divert a comet that's coming in in 1997, and he's about to tell you this is huge because he's about to tell you that these comets are doing course corrections. And again, it's probably going to be my private group where I speak more and go into things like this, but we could do deeper dives. But he's going to say that the comet had 23 course corrections, which means he's about to show you in a second that an alien race or something was pointing this comet at us. And then they would steer it off and they would be put back in line. So imagine a comet's coming, they steer it off, it gets put back in line. They steer it off, it gets put back in line. They realized that something was pointing this at us. But he doesn't harp on it too much, but I just find it interesting. So it's like, who doesn't like us out there? Why are we such a threat? Maybe Nibiru is real. I saw a guy's thing on Twitch the other day where he said he had a dream that he's part of a future Mars colonization colony. So maybe we become a tyranny or something like that starts to take over the universe or something like that. Who knows? But for some reason, and I get that from Barbara Marciniak. I've watched her station a long time. I wish I could shout you all out, but I'll try. Obviously busy. But 23 course corrections. This comet that's being pointed at us.
Discovered it 2 years before it arrived in the vicinity of the Earth. But NASA and the Air Force knew about it 10 years prior to the arrival and been tracking it because it was the largest comet known in history to approach the Earth. As it got closer, they were concerned with the fact that the gaseous envelope, over 25 miles in diameter, was filled with chlorine and methane, and if it should contact the Earth's atmosphere, it could quite literally poison the atmosphere and kill everything on Earth. Or if the cometary body itself were to crash into even the ocean, the tidal waves and the disturbance could kill approximately, by estimate, half the world's population. Therefore, there was a great deal of effort in diverting this thing when they knew it was going to approach the Earth. They had to wait and see what the trajectory was. Well, the trajectory didn't remain the normal trajectory. There were 23 course corrections. Somebody was steering it straight into the Earth. And of course, it was eventually diverted. Preston was part of it, and he could tell his own story on this, as how it happened. But it was diverted by a very wide distance, slightly ahead of the original mathematically plotted and computer-generated trajectory, and left a safe distance. After it was passed, it was hit again and broken into 6 pieces, which went on out into space. With the successful termination of that program, the Air Force moved out of Montauk.
Sucks for another planet.
In June of 1998, and abandoned the base. Wasn't abandoned for long. Again, I was not part of this, nor was Preston at this time. The Navy moved in and took over the base for their own operations from that point to this.
So, guys, something I'd like to say is, as we approach Meta World, and I call Meta World us going beyond the physical. A lot of people call me Meta. Obviously for different reasons, I don't put Meta here. I put Mr. Metaphysical, but within my community, the nickname is Meta. That was what they call me, and but I also name Meta World as something that's like the world that's coming that's beyond the physical, because I feel like at some point we all have a similar name or unique name. As Law of One tells us, there's only one communication from the one to the one. I think that's different things for different people. It'd be different names for me. I call that name Meta. So in a sense, I'm like, we're all Meta. Don't get me wrong. I could go on a tangent with that, but I don't want to. As far as like the movie Friday and everything. Anyway, so 23 course corrections. So what's something out there was trying to, target us.
This day. Exactly what they're doing, we don't know, other than the underwater and underground particle beam generating systems, which are very complex and require an enormous amount of power, are still used. But my involvement in Montauk ended on the night of August 12, 1983. And I was told, actually, 3 days before that date, about 9 August, to go take a hike, take a vacation, get off the base. Duncan was diverted into another area of the base for the project, so there was no possibility that either I, as Al Bielek, or Duncan number 2 could possibly meet Duncan number 1, or Ed Cameron, and myself, and cause a possible time paradox. So we were kept well apart. They were aware of this possibility and avoided the problem. After the station collapsed, of course, it was no longer used until such time as I indicated. But I was never again part of the Montauk project. Aside from the Montauk Boys program, which expanded to every city in the U.S., major city, and as the Air Force later determined, sometime in 1997, 98, that it was a worldwide problem, though certainly of much less intensity and usage than in the U.S., because I went to Europe on my lecture series, and I also went to Australia. There were Montauk Boys there, but the numbers were very low.
People are being programmed worldwide.
Before getting into some of the other aspects of Montauk, to close off on the subject of Montauk Boys, in 1993, I met a gentleman by the name of Phil Schneider, who was a retired, by his own choice, government geologist. He was at one of my lectures up in Seattle, but his home was in Portland, Oregon area. I told him about the Montauk Boys thing, and he became rather incensed. He said, "This to me smells of pedophilia." I said, "Well, perhaps you could say that in a manner of speaking." He says, "I want to look into it." He did. He went to the Portland Police Department, asked them about it, and they says, "Yes, we've heard of the program, and we would advise you it would be best for you not to poke your nose in business that doesn't concern you." They were quite telling him, "Go get lost and don't come back." He became quite upset about that, and he went to the FBI. The FBI, he went to the office, and he met one of the people who had been in the service there over 20 years, a senior FBI man, and discussed it with him. And he said, "Yes, we know about the program." "Oh, you know about it?" "Yes." "What are you doing about it?" "Nothing." "Well, why aren't you?" "We can't." "And why not?" "Because our hands are tied." This is, let me give you a few statistics. And this is where I became very interested when he came back to me with these statistics. And this is common knowledge, if you know where to look. It's not suppressed. So every year in the United States, approximately 2 million kids disappear. And this has been ongoing for at least 20 years. We investigate, of course, where we can. Eventually, we find out what happened to at least 1 million of those kids within that year's period. Some of them are found and returned to their parents, but the other million, we never find anything out about whatever. It's just like a blank slate. We don't know where they went or what happened to them. This has been ongoing for some 20 years, essentially. Well, it doesn't take too much mathematics to figure 20 years times 1 million. It's 20 million kids have disappeared in 20 years, approximately. Yeah. Suppose half of them were picked up by the Montauk Boys program. That's a very large, shall we say, a secret army. Under somebody's control. Well, I told that to Phil, and Phil said in the process, discussing it, he saw that possibility, but I went back to Preston, and when the first Montauk Boys programming site under Sag Harbor, Long Island, was broken into by the Air Force sometime in 1997 because of what Preston told them, and the things we were doing there at that time, the Air Force got into it, and they closed the base. They got all the files and the records. Preston was allowed to see them. They had 30,000 dossiers from that one location alone with photos and a complete history of the Montauk Boy had been processed. The one came from as far away as Australia to be run through Sag Harbor. The personnel were all low-level personnel in strange gray uniforms with no rank, no bars indicating name, but strange red threads, epaulets or whatever it was on their shoulders. But the desk hardware was the most interesting. The desk pen and pencil sets all had a red rosy cross, a red rose on top of a golden cross, which could be the Rose Cross, it could be the Rosicrucian Order. We're not sure exactly what, because there are both. And further digging on part of Preston and myself indicated, so far as Preston was concerned, the Palatine monks were involved in this thing. And other groups, the Knights Malta, not the Knights Templar. And by implication, of course, the possibility of the Masonic Order. They're not making a statement the Masonic Order was involved, but there is an implication it could have been. Somebody at high level was running this thing. The religious orders were being used as a front. And as we finally learned, the government and the military had nothing to do with the operation of this program. And it was set up by the Germans. It was not being run by the German people as it went on in time. We are still to get all the answers as to who's running it, what the ultimate purpose is. Again, at that time, I got no answers as to what the purpose was and what it could be used for, but it's fairly obvious today because all you have to look around you, as I've already said, you can see the mayhem that has been created, and particularly in terms of the school shootings, where these kids act, in some cases, absolutely blankly, a blank mind, and then are snapped out of it later. Particularly the Conyers, Georgia incident, exactly 1 month after the Columbine operation, where the kid was shooting one quite randomly in the yard, hit no one. The assistant principal came out, talked him into dropping the gun, putting it down, which he did, then came up and put his arms around him, and the kid snapped like that, jolted. Where am I? Wow. What's going on? He had absolutely no recollection of what he did.
Wow.
This is what has been going on in all of these cases of these school shootings. One has to look a little further and understand.
Guys, while it's even mind-blowing, it's so mind-blowing that I don't even believe him. I'm not going to lie. This guy's lived a crazy life. Like, we'd have to come back and cover this later. This is how crazy life. But he says, in these school shootings, he says, well, he just says in this one, the kid didn't even know he was doing it. Was like, where am I? Now, in no way am I justifying school shootings, but I think the implications for this are huge. And for me, the implications, what it means is somebody, somewhere, some planet, or someone on this planet, which I doubt it is pretty much injecting enough fear within us and distrust of one another through these types of events that we never rise into, as a whole, we learn this in Law of One, that we're all trying to activate Green Ray, and that we never rise into universal love for one another. Someone recently told me that if you look back, there's a war. If you start tracking wars, there's a major world or big-time war every 80 years. You know, and I looked at him. I remember my eyebrows looked it up. I was like, wow, I think it's a pretty popular thought now. So someone's keeping us, and then we think of all the movies. Fear is just injected everywhere to keep us from rising into. Because without fear, there's going to be universal love of one another. So we all have love of one another, and that makes that's Law of One. We'll have to get into that, but that makes you a universal citizen as far as instead of just a planetary Law of One, I guess. But here we go. School shootings, kid not knowing where he's at. That's where we're at.
Understand what the program is. And it's becoming quite obvious what the program is to those who look at it at all, particularly in the Columbine operation. This resulted in passing legislation on gun control, which had been stymied for a long period of time. And that operation was massive. I won't go into it because that's a totally different story, but it's one of many. This is only one aspect. Somebody is running a program to control the thrust of legislation. This is one possibility, and there's actually one reality. The Montauk Boys can be used for a lot of other things. One can look around and one can see it. You might note that in the whole operation of these school shootings, whether it be Conyers, Columbine, or whatever, no one ever suggests that these kids have been under some form of mind control. This is a totally verboten subject. They will not approach it. They will not admit to it. They will not even consider it. This is one aspect of what I would like to get public. This Montauk Boys program is very subversive. It is very invasive.
Remember, this could be broken if you raise your Kundalini up. In Law of One, they teach you how to do this with the disciplines of the personality. You can do this through yogic techniques. The best and safest way to do it is by utilizing the disciplines of the personality in your daily life, practicing love, practicing forgiveness. That's the best way to begin the process. Or it's a much longer and slower way to do it, but or just meditating, different things like that, or putting in hypnosis. And I've already told you the source you can go to.
Intrudes in many areas of our society and
maybe doing things like ayahuasca and stuff like that, but I'm not, I haven't done it yet, so I haven't done those things, ayahuasca yet. I may do it, but most likely will eventually. But here we go. There's other things too. Okay.
In an unobvious manner, but it's very real. Those who are manipulating it, you cannot really point out and say, you're running this program, or you're doing this. There are many levels involved in terms of this mind manipulation as to who is responsible and what the ultimate agenda is.
People do it, whoever's in charge.
I could go on this for a very long period of time because one can surmise where some of it is coming from. Yeah. And I might add, from my experience.
Look out for future. I can't promise everything, y'all, because it was a stretch to even put this out, to be honest. I didn't put it out, but to actually attach this to the Mr. Metaphysical Station, in a sense, endorsing it, attaching my face to it, and actually not just saying, that's this crazy woo-woo stuff. Am I one of the few 35,000 subscribers to channel 3X and one of the first 10, 15,000. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. And so basically this is, I mean, guys, this first time I listen to this, anyway, I want to get into it. I don't want to get into it. But some of the deeper dives, look out for the groups. Maybe I'll have a link in this video. I'm going to start my first group here soon. Well, not the first one, but not a new one. But look out for those. And guys, this is like, yeah. We'll do the bills more in the groups privately.
I don't think all of it is directed from our legislative bodies or the secret governments on the face of the earth. I do feel that some of it comes in the agenda, and the ultimate agenda comes from off planet. But that is my feeling, and my stated feeling. I cannot prove it.
Yo, he wasn't aware of Law of One. So during his time, you got to realize that in his first life right now, he's destroying this whole place. He's Al Bielek right now. But his first life as Ed Cameron, he's traveled to the year 2137, which we're going to have videos like that. You're going to see that here in a second, too. Well, that's going to be on the channel, too. It's all on channel 3X, so just go there. But this is... It's crazy. It's crazy. I forgot what I was going to say, but this is in his life right now. And anyway.
Before I close out totally on the subject of the Montauk boys, I might add that much of the information I have garnered, of course, is my recall of what I was involved in after I became aware of my connection with the Montauk Project and the many phases of it. Further research since that point, in terms of what's going on with the Montauk boys, that I think you will find interesting. What they went through at that time, 76 to 83, and for quite some years after, because while Montauk Point was closed down, the programs were not. The Montauk Boys program continued to this day at various locations. If you have psychic sensitivity and can see auras, or if you are good in reading body language, a Montauk boy in phase 1, because we call it initial phase, not the physical, that was perhaps 1A, whatever. Phase 1 in terms of electronic processing, the one-on-one pad business, continued for many years. And this produced a product, if I may use that term, which was rather obvious. Anyone, even without body language or without psychic sensitivity, could detect that these victims, in many cases, didn't act entirely normal. They lacked spontaneity. They sometimes were a little jerky in emotions and so forth, depending on how severely they've been hit. Anyone who could read auras could see immediately this person had been processed through the Montauk Boys Project, if they knew what it was about. But they would see in the outer aura a jagged black outline. It's just like let's say a fairly wide pen or a narrow paintbrush would paint a jagged line around the entire aura. A person who could read body language would see, because of what the body language says, that I have been programmed, I'm not normal. This is very obvious to a person who can read body language. This system, this approach, went on for quite a number of years. And I would estimate about 1995, we went into phase 2. It was refined in terms of the electronics. They were much less obvious in normal daily life. The outline in the aura was much smoother and less obvious, and the body language was not as easy to read. About December of 1997, while I was in Denver, I was in Denver from in 1997, from August to December, I started to note an influx of a new type of Montauk boy, and I also noted something else. It was approaching saturation of young people, because it became a case not of trying to find a Montauk boy among the boys running around the town, but trying to find somebody who was not a Montauk boy. This is what the situation is now. Virtually all young people who went through the program, it's at least 90%. Those who are unfit, of course, physically or mentally, and they are dropped out. But those who are run through the new program, there's no longer one-on-one pads, there's no EEG machines or anything similar. But the new program is now on a totally new approach. speaking in terms of electronics and electronic manipulation of the mind, they now have a technique using RF microwave energy with the proper modulations. They produce a scalar wave wherein if they pick a group of candidates who fit the same general categories of what they want, have the same general physical characteristics, mental characteristics, traits, whatever, and they want to put out, let's say, 30 people into one particular program, they put them in this room and now batch process them. The RF energies will impinge on everyone's brain simultaneously. No longer are you concerned about the chakras and approaching it through a chakra system.
RF frequency, I think radio frequencies, I think.
But you impinge it on through the brain into the conscious and
no longer through the chakra systems, but through the brain. And so this,
the subconscious.
I'll come back to that in a second.
And in a fairly short period of time, I've never witnessed this program, but I would make an estimate of about 30 minutes max. They haven't fully programmed. It's all through in the subconscious. And they've done some 20 or 30 people all at once. They go out the door and they're Montauk boys, but very undetectable. The new system is very smooth. It leaves almost no mark on the aura, and body language is very difficult to read. And in terms of an ordinary person observing somebody else, there's hardly any evidence of a lack of spontaneity or any evidence of a change in that person's normal characteristics or behavior. This is the ongoing program as it is now, and this is where the numbers come in of at least 10 million Montauk boys in the U.S. Nothing like this around the world, but having been in Switzerland and in Australia, I've seen them there, but they are very limited in numbers. I would say not over 10%, perhaps not over 5%, if that much. In the U.S. today, it's approaching 90%.
Yeah.
The programming now includes girls because no longer are you concerned about the chakra polarities, and no longer are you concerned about approaching it with a pad or the electronic machine, but you do it with an RF system. You impinge directly on the brain. It doesn't matter whether they're male or female. You can impinge the same program through a male or a female, and now Montauk girls are showing up in larger numbers. And I might add, one of their primary functions is to keep a Montauk boy happy in the very physical sense.
Wow.
The sex between the male and the female will lock in the program that boy has received or the girl has even deeper. That was the major problem with the homosexual approach, is they would deprogram themselves. This is not wanted. So in a male-female relationship, it locks in the program. So if somebody is particularly important, and I know of at least one friend of mine who's in this category, who's been programmed, he had a girlfriend who was a Montauk girl, wished to keep him in line and see he would do certain things. She's no longer with him. He married her. That broke up. He's remarried to someone much better, I'm happy to say. But this is a wrinkle on the program. There's an even more additional wrinkle, shall we say, to this program now. They've branched out. In the matter of the Columbine operation, and before that, of course, one of the things that showed up was a group called the Trenchcoat Mafia. Now, this term actually came out of Eric's mouth and also Dylan's mouth. They consider themselves members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. Others showed up at the site, which is not publicly reported.
You're talking about the shooters.
And I might add, my number two son considered himself a member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, and he had personally admitted that he was in a government employ as an assassin. This is one of the things they use the Montauk boys for. And I'm not happy to say it was my number two son. I won't go into how I found out he was, but I did. And this whole operation of Trenchcoat Mafia can be traced to an Air Force base now closed upstate New York. The same air base where Eric Harris's father in the Air Force.
As you see, I've watched enough of these videos. I don't feel like I'm sleepy. It's the morning time. I stop. I'm doing a lot of this in the middle of the night after I wake up before I go to sleep. So I think, unfortunately, I'm about to bring it to a close. I'll start part 7. Like I said, you can watch this completely through with not my boring or rude interruptions, and at channel 3X here on YouTube. But I'll pick up here with the Trenchcoat Mafia Program Boys on the next video. Y'all take care. Hey, Oh, what I was going to say that I said I was going to come back to. It's like somebody just told me that. Is that I think it was Sandra Brown. It was some popular psychic who was on a talk show, and they asked what's one piece of advice she would give every day, and she said to start off your day doing some type of light ritual or prayer to protect you in light and block you for these type of things. So like, I wish I could find it. If there's someone out there knows how to do it, feel free to post in the comments how to protect yourself with light. But yeah, y'all, this has been fun. Hopefully this wasn't too triggering or shocking for certain people. I'm sorry if it was. Get put in hypnosis. Anyway, love and light, y'all. See y'all soon.